Okay, hi. I'm Shelley Danko-Day. I'm the Open Space Specialist for the Department of City Planning, and I manage the Adopt a Lot program. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Adopt a Lot program. First of all, I've got to figure out how to make this work. Nope. There we go. So the Adopt a Lot program is a process that the city created to allow people to access city-owned vacant land. We have a lot of vacant land in the city, and you've probably noticed that. You're probably wondering why. Well, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, we had double the population we have now. We had about 600,000 people. Now we have around 300,000 people. So people abandoned their properties because they lost their jobs and at the steel mill and other industries, and they moved out of the area. So they abandoned their houses. Their houses got into disrepair. We had to take responsibility for these properties and make them safe. Some of them were falling over, so we had to demolish them, and that left a lot of vacant land. The cost of maintenance, compromising quality of life, and the reduced property values have weakened the city's tax base and left us with all these vacant properties. So the open space plan that was produced in 2013 recommended that in order to handle some of these vacancies, that we hire an open space specialist, was one of the recommendations, and then also create this path to accessing city-owned vacant land that was very clear for residents and more streamlined than the previous process. The previous process, which GTEC has experienced quite a bit, they did a few projects on city-owned land, and you would enter through one of the city departments. So you'd come in through the law department, or maybe you knew somebody in real estate, or you'd talk to somebody at the mayor's office, and then you'd create a packet of information and present it to that department, and then they'd say, that's great, but we have to go to this department. So then you'd be sent to the next department, have to create another packet of information and go through another process. And then there's city council, and then there's art commission, there's the union's permission you had to get to be doing work on city land. So it was a very long process. Sometimes it would take from 9 to 12 months. So streamlining that was really important to be able to activate a lot of our vacant land. So we created the Vacant Lot Toolkit. Now the Vacant Lot Toolkit is a helpful resource for private land and public land. It tells you basic ideas about what to look for in a property if you want to grow food, if you want to grow flowers, if you want to do all kinds of projects, art projects or what have you. But it also is a how-to guide for our Adopt a Lot program. And our Adopt a Lot program allows, if you're looking at city land, the Adopt a Lot program is that streamlined process I was telling you about. We have two options. There's a license, which is if you're one person and you want to do something on one lot, you want to garden, either flower or food garden, on one lot for one season, you can get the license, which is kind of the more sophisticated version of what used to be our garden waiver, which is a whole other thing. But that was something that real estate had to sort of fulfill the need at the time. But now it's this license program, which is a lot more solid and really gives you legal access. And then there's the lease, which is a little more extensive if you have multiple lots, or if there's a group of people, or some people are doing projects with like a summer program with kids that want to garden on a lot. That would be in the lease program. And then we have an option for people who want to produce and sell what they grow on city land, have a market stand on the site. And that's the market stand lease. That's the only one that costs money. It's $25. The other programs are free. The license, like I said, it's one season, one lot, no structures. You can put a fence, you can put raised beds, and you can only do flower or food gardens. You can't sell or donate what you grow on the lot, but you can take it and give it to your neighbors or what have you. The only things that are required for a license are, everyone has to do a soil test. So soil test results are the first thing you have to do when you apply to Adopt a Lot. And all you need to give us is a project description and a simple site plan. This is not an example of a simple site plan. This is a more elaborate site plan that someone did. But a drawing, essentially, or like a sketch of what you're going to do is enough to tell us what to expect. The Adopt a Lot lease is a little more extensive. It's a one-year lease initially with 3 renewal years. You can do flower, food, or rain gardens to capture stormwater. Insurance is required for the lot because there's additional liability when you are able to do more and have groups of people and it's multiple lots. And you can't sell what you grow on the land. You can't have a market stand on the land unless you have the market stand lease. Like I said, that's $25, and you can sell up to $10,000 worth of produce. These are the different parts of the application. I have some sample applications here. I have created these templates that walk you through all the different parts of the application that you can pick up before you leave here. And it's also on our website. And I think everybody received a bookmark when they walked in. But essentially, you have to tell us the story of your project, provide a site plan. It helps you to think through the materials list and the budget and the maintenance that you have to do on your lot. You give us existing photos because that satisfies one of the department's requirements to make sure they have sort of before shots and also shots of utilities, photographs of utilities that might be on the site. Then, like I said, the liability insurance and the soil test results. What's allowed? These are all the things that are allowed on the Adopt a Lot program on city-owned land. We were able to work with our commission and city council and also the law department to make sure that we had as much of what was actually happening on lots, as much as what citizens were already doing on city-owned land, included in this, so that we wouldn't have to go through Art Commission and we wouldn't have to go through City Council every single time. So as long as your project fits within the parameters in the vacant lot toolkit, and these are the things that are allowed: little libraries, birdhouses, rain barrels, sheds, pavilions to a certain size, then it can go through the process very streamlined. These are the things that are not allowed. There's signs, but just general signs. We have a sign template that you can actually have this template sign that we've allowed on our sites, on our land. No play equipment because that adds to the liability. Art by an artist because then that would have to go through Art Commission. Memorials, fire pits, pizza ovens will never be allowed on city land. You'll have to buy it first. And stages or performance areas. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, the Adopt a Lot program.
Hello, everyone. My name is Demi, and I work for Operation Butterblock in Homewood. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet and just kind of drill down a little bit as to how we as a community group worked with other partners to actually apply the Adopt a Lot process. So this just gives you an idea of what Homewood looks like. So Homewood is 1 square mile. Does everyone know where Homewood is? Yes, okay, far east end, almost the last neighborhood outside, right before you hit outside the city. So this is a current map of Homewood. We worked with our partners at Pitt, University Center for Social and Urban Research, to develop this map. We did an on-the-ground foot survey in 2014 to assess where the occupied properties are, where the vacant properties are, and the vacant lots are. So this map is actually pretty astounding. What it shows is all of the areas that are almost that white color have 50% or more vacancy on that particular lot. So most of Homewood is over 50% vacant, and that accounts for properties and lots. You will see there are 2 dark purple areas, which are 0 to 10%. Those, one of the areas is the high school, the one on the left-hand side, and the one on the right-hand side is our housing community, Housing Authority, City of Pittsburgh. So that just kind of speaks to the depth of the issue that we're dealing with in the neighborhood. So this map is what we used the data that we collected for. So we had gone around and done this survey. We had finally gotten a handle on, okay, here's what the neighborhood looks like, but now what are we going to do with it? So we developed a kind of a non-traditional planning process. Usually in neighborhoods like Bloomfield, Garfield, Oakland, Hilltop, they will do processes where you have the entire community come out and do a series of maybe 5 to 7 planning meetings to vision with the people who live there, to talk about what the future of their neighborhood looks like. Because Homewood has experienced such an extraordinary amount of disinvestment, the people there are fairly disengaged, and for good reason, right? The neighborhood has almost been forgotten about over the last several decades. So we knew that we had to kind of rethink how we were going to engage the neighborhood. So instead of doing a neighborhood-wide planning process all at once, we broke the neighborhood up into chunks, which we called clusters. So we developed 9 clusters throughout the neighborhood, and we did a series of 3 meetings to vision with the residents who live right in that immediate area. And this is the final product. So it took us about 18 months, which is a little bit longer than most planning processes also. But we talked about what different types of land use could be options in the future. So you'll see like little pink rectangles which show new houses. You'll see green extended rectangles which show green spaces. Up on the very top right, there's like some cloud-looking things. There's also like one of the recommendations was that they decommission some streets because there's just like paper streets up there. So like I said, it was a little bit of a non-traditional process, but it really gave us the ability to do a more engaged and in-depth planning process with the residents of the neighborhood. So let me just make sure. Okay. So one of the things that was kind of a low-hanging fruit item for implementation of the plan that I just showed you was green space. So people said that they wanted to see new houses. They wanted to see maybe 24 houses built in a particular area. Well, we know that that's a more long-term process, right? You're gonna have to raise funding, get developers' interest, acquire the properties, do construction. So that was kind of some of the more long-term, but some of the immediate, more tangible items that we could do were the green space implementation. So right around this time that the plan finished, OBB got funding through the state to do implementation of the plan. So we selected some partners. Some were within the community that are nonprofits also doing work in the neighborhood, and some are intermediaries like Rebuilding Together Pittsburgh and G-Tech. So this particular project was one that we did last year in our first year of implementation, where we used the Adopt-A-Lot process. There is a resident, Miss Mary Savage, who is in her 80s, lived in Homewood her whole life, and she has been every summer planting flowers on vacant lots, somewhere close to a dozen vacant lots. And she cares for them. She usually gets some volunteers, high school volunteers to come out, and she's done this every year for decades. And so we were really concerned about how the Adopt-A-Lot process might change that for her, because she's never gotten city permission before. They've never noticed she was doing this before. So we were just kind of skeptical on like, how can we provide technical assistance to her to go through this process, make sure she's legally doing it, and as an organization kind of be the one supporting it, because it's a lot of paperwork and like managing communication, right, where she doesn't have a computer. So it was great that OBB was in the neighborhood and able to help kind of facilitate the application process. So we applied for, I think, maybe 4 or 5 of her lots. Do you remember, Shelley? Was it? So we did apply for all of them, yeah. Yeah, so it was great. We were able to work directly with the city to actually compile the applications. We worked with G-Tech to do the designs, which Shelley showed you as one of the necessary components, and then again worked with G-Tech to actually purchase the flowers and plant them. So this was an overgrown lot, and then you can see some shrubs planted there in the front, and we were able to cut down the whole lot. And now we're able to use OBB's Junior Green Corps program to help maintain it once we're able to get like one first big heavy cut done, and then we are doing ongoing maintenance after that. This was a little bit more involved of a project, clearly. This is a really interesting project because the lots, so this is right across from an elementary school. There used to be 2 abandoned houses here. We worked with the residents to advocate to 311, the city's non-emergency hotline, to get them torn down. But then they were just turning into severely overgrown vacant lots. So the residents really said that they wanted a play space for the kids since it's right across from the elementary school. So the city owned the lots and the URA had a hold on them, which is a really interesting status for lots to have. So we had to kind of work through that process and figure out who do we talk to, who's the appropriate party to contact. So we did actually go through the adopt-a-lot process. Meanwhile, we were actually under sales agreement with the URA to purchase them. So the adopt-a-lot process was perfect for the intermediate time period before we had actually purchased them for the URA, from the URA, so that we could still actively keep working on them during that time period. So this parklet was finished in, I guess, just a couple months ago now. And it was a learning experience, because one of the things I will tell you is that when you're doing these projects, anyone who is working on a vacant lot, you will learn that because the amount of abandonment that has happened in the city as a whole, a lot of the houses have been demolished. So when you are doing projects like this, there is an entire house underneath that ground. So our budget didn't change. We still had to do the project with the amount of fundraising that we had. But meanwhile, we are digging up cinder blocks and 2x4s and bricks, so many bricks that were all underneath the ground. And we actually started with, we had the residents who were working on these blocks with us. We were digging out by shovels. And it was a complete and total nightmare. I mean, these are elderly residents, most of them 65 or older. And so we were able to get some machinery out. There was another project going on we were working on with G-Tech. And so it was expedited tremendously then. But like I said, that's one thing to take into consideration. When you're doing these adopt-a-lot projects, there are tons of vacant lots, as we all know. But you just have to be mindful of what's in the ground beneath those. Which leads to my next point, soil testing. So we never knew this was an issue in Homewood. We all have heard of Flint and now the city and the issues with lead in water. But one of the things we hadn't been super cognizant of is lead in soil. We had done a project, our Junior Green Corps program with G-Tech, 3 years ago, I think, where we planted the city's largest sunflower lot. But it was more for a demonstration, not so much for soil remediation, right? We were then, the next 2 seasons, the Junior Green Corps wanted to plant an urban garden. So we did plant sunflowers on that lot to remediate the soil. We actually had to do 2 growing seasons of sunflowers to remediate the soil. But like I said, those were really the only soil tests we had ever done in the neighborhood until the adopt-a-lot process dropped and we were required to do it. So you'll see on the left-hand side here from UMass, the ideal level is less than 22 parts per million, okay? This is just on the right, our results, a small sampling of what we had. So some of them are, medium level. We have 37, 31. Some of them are a little higher, 93. And then we had one, which is almost 250. That particular lot that had 250 parts per million was a lot that Miss Savage had been planting flowers on for the last several years. So really a cause for concern. And because now the adopt-a-lot required soil sampling, we're able to say, actually, that's not a safe place for you to be planting flowers. Let's find another lot for you to do so. So one of the best things that for us at OBB that's come out of the adopt-a-lot process is we now know this is an issue. We are able to actually make better informed health, like public health decisions based on where the lead content is in the soil. And it's actually turned into kind of an issue that we've taken on at Operation Better Block now. So through GTech, our Junior Green Corps program was trained on how to do soil sampling this summer. So they've actually been doing the soil samples themselves and reading the results and kind of using that as a decision to, is this safe to be on, is this not safe to be on? And then, most importantly, we're going to be able to use that as an advocacy tool when we're talking to the city of Pittsburgh about demolition standards and about vacant lot remediation within the city as a whole. So it might just seem like one step in the Adopt a Lot process, but it's actually been really integral in how we operate as an organization and what we're looking to do in the neighborhood moving forward. So that is everything. Again, my name is Demi. My email's up there. Does anyone have any questions right now before I turn it over?
Thank you all for being here. I'm Attila Chokai, and I just, I think it was in June that we finished signing the contract for the Adopt a Lot lease. And the title is, I'll step away over here. The title is Embrace Your Weirdness and Adopt a Lot. And I call it that, and I showed it to my wife, and her first words was, I don't like that. I was like, that's good. That's a good title then. Because it sort of, shocks you a little bit. And the reason I called it that is because every time I told somebody, they give me this look like, why? And I talked to Shelley about it a little bit. I get this look, why would you do that? And in Hazelwood, aren't you afraid? And things like that. And I was like, well, that's when I know I'm doing something good when people start questioning that you're weird. So on that note, why did I get into this? So I am a IT project manager by day at CMU. And every other time, I deal with native plants. I love native plants, native gardening, rain gardens, beer brewing. There's that sort of trend. I like to dig, do things with my hand. I'm also a Penn State master gardener, a tree tender. It just wanted to bring these up as not as an advertisement, but there's this trend with me of how did I end up in IT project management when every other time this is what I do. But I guess the point is, as a private residence, you can do this. It's possible. I do it. I have helped so far. I'm sure as Ward will get out and I get more involved in the Hazelwood community, that relationship will build even further. That was supposed to show up at the same time. I forgot about it. That's just an example of the lead test that you see here. That's actually not mine. But what I'd like to cover next is the application overview. So the lot that I adopted is on Flowers Avenue here in Hazelwood. If you follow 2nd Avenue, it's one street before Hazelwood Avenue. I live in Greenfield, right on Beechwood Boulevard, nice busy street. I have a nice shaded backyard and a small front yard, so there's not much space for gardening. I grew up on the farm in Hungary, and I left for the US, Canada, long story, in late 80s. And I wanted to have something where I can express, that I can feel more grounded with this kind of stuff. And I wanted a lot. So I knew somebody in Hazelwood here. I found out about this lot. But I think GTech covered also a lot of opportunities of how you can find out about vacant lots and how to go about it. Shelley touched on the application process. So I filled out the former application, not the one that's here. It was a really long application, and I felt like I was on the Park and Recreation's story a little bit, because it was a really, really long form, and I thought, oh my gosh, I mean, I do planning for a living, so to speak, during the day, and this is a lot to go through for a resident. And so I went through it, and I sent it back, and this is nothing against it, and so I found out, well, oh, there's a new application. Okay, that's cool. So I filled out the new application, which was much easier because it's really well done. It's to the point, only what's required you have to fill out, and I don't think it's that hard to complete. And I have to say, the whole process, and I mentioned this not because, again, Shelley is here, but it was really painless I think the hardest part was filling out the application. And of course, now that it's approved, doing the actual work, which is like when you go into school, when you get into grad school, you thought getting in was the hard part. So there are some challenges, but if anybody's interested, I did bring 10 copies of my actual application, what I filled out, including the lead test, the drawings that I did, and I brought 10 copies of the resources as well, including the insurance contacts and other contacts that I have found useful or needed along the way. But essentially, the application is like a project plan. You know, you define your project goal. For me, the project goal was, again, embracing my weirdness, I wanted to have a Penn State pollinator certified garden, and that's what you saw on the front page. I think as I work through this, I want to take it beyond that, especially as I started talking to community members, and I'm in the larger Pittsburgh area, including Berg Bees. They mentioned that, oh, that would be really interesting to get some plants for you. If you could buy some plants for you, because it's would be more cost effective than buying $7 plugs. So I want to start raising native plants. I have a list of 25 seed plant types that I'll be ordering this fall. I'll be starting them at home, and I'll be planting them out in the garden. Eventually, and even now, I started looking around for people who know garden design. So instead of just planting them in nice rows and raising the plants, I want to incorporate that land design into that land. So there's a space for mingling, for sitting down, that kind of stuff. So that's something I will be looking for. But again, it's just a project plan. I guess it's just, but you have to think of what is your goal. So define your goal and start breaking down into small steps how you're going to get there. So again, the application was very, I think, straightforward. I took some photos. The hard part for me personally was drawing the plan to scale, because I tend to overdo things. That's just me. I get into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really complex, and I overcomplicate it for myself. And after I spend, I don't know, days or hours on it, I step back and say, oh, forget it, this is really not that hard, what they're really asking for. It covers the maintenance plan, who is going to mow the lawn. You have to list all the people who will be helping you. So far I have 2 and a local helper who's going to mow the lawn, clean up the site, that kind of stuff. My actual project plan, the end goal is to make it pollinator friendly certified. I think I'd like to go for that probably next summer, next fall, given the planting will be put in place in the spring. So the first step that I outlined in my project plan was clean up the site. So far I spent the last few months being there on weekends or sometimes during the week after work, cleaning it up. And some of the other presenters have touched on as well. For some reason, I was digging and it was a huge roof tile, one of those ceramic roof tiles in the ground that I pulled out, a ton of bricks, ton of wood. This garden was also used as a garden before, then it was sort of left behind, and all the wood that was set up as garden beds deteriorated, and it just was in the way. You would trip on it. So I spent you probably end up spending a lot of hours cleaning up the site. So I think right now that site is at a point where it's cleaned up for the most part. There's still some wood to remove. Perhaps using it to my advantage is like I said, there's a amount of wood, rotted wood, that I've gathered from around the site. And I piled it in the back middle of the property. And it could look like a huge pile of rotting wood, but part of the certification process is to provide pollinators with a place to hide. So that actually provides that purpose. So I don't think it looks bad. If I get complaints about it, we can deal with it. It's further back, it's not as visible, and it's just a large pile of deteriorating wood. And whenever you move that, you actually find that there's a lot of critters and bugs that are just enjoying it. So that works for it really well. The other part was, of course, the materials, the plants, and the budget. Starting from seed has the advantage that it's cheaper. It will take me longer. So that covers the budget. Is right now I'm pretty much 100% self-financing it. It has cost a few $100s so far. I know it might be a different a problem, and other organizations may need a different approach. So far, I can do this. I have ideas of how I can raise money for this in the future. And in terms of materials, I have access to rain barrels, and if any of you are interested in those 50-gallon rain barrels, well, they're not rain barrels, they're used for fish emulsion and other fertilizers. I have access to a number of those through Crutchman Farm. I just have to bring it home. Sometimes I bring 2 or 3 of them home in a minivan, and the kids were sitting with me, and they said it really stinks by the time we got home because it's used for fertilizer. So if anybody needs that, I go there occasionally. I can bring some home, and you take it, and you can retrofit it. The soil test we talked about. Also, there are 2 options for, let me just move forward a bit. There are 2 options for the soil test. One is the University of Massachusetts, which was on the previous presentation, and I'll have their contact for you as well. And then there's the Penn State University, the soil test as well. University of Massachusetts includes the lead test for a little bit more, or I forgot the cost of those tests now, but it was just nice if they give you instructions on how to do it, you mail it away, and you get pretty much that soil test back. And if you take a copy of my application, the actual soil test is in there as well. Luckily for me, the lead test was below the normal acceptable range, so that was nice to hear. And I think that's also probably because that site has previously been used as a garden, and I think it was filled in. Interestingly, the phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, all of that was excessive. I don't know how that thing was sort of fertilized before, but everything is 100%. So I don't have to fertilize for a while. But the other advantage of growing native plants is that again, I would like to use it as an educational opportunity, but they require less watering. So I don't have to worry about the watering as much. I don't have to worry about if there was too much lead in the soil, for example. And this was the hard part for me. This is the part I tend to overthink. So if you go to the Allegheny County website, that's the actual lot, that big one there. It says Pittsburgh right there. So as you can see, it's L-shaped. And as soon as it enters the L part, that's a heavily wooded area. It looks like there were some steps going up to Hazelwood Avenue before, if you go further and up. So it's interesting, but so that's where you can get the measurement of the lot. If you zoom in further enough, it will give you the measurement of the lot. Then I bought an engineer's ruler or an architect's ruler, because I have to fit that onto an 8.5 by 11 paper. And that's the part I think I was overthinking. It's like, oh my gosh, like how much detail do they need here? I just started drawing, and that itself was a learning experience. So I ended up with something like that. Right now, that mirrors pretty much what the previous outline of the lot was. I plan to use that initially to get the seedling started, and eventually, when I find somebody to work with on terms of the design, because I have ideas, but I don't think I'm the best garden designer in terms of looks yet. That's something that I'd like to focus on. The insurance part was really interesting. When I needed the insurance, I called up my local Nationwide and I said, hi, I'd like to get insurance for this lot. And they said, sure, we can give that to you for $860 a year. And that was after all those questions that you see on there. I mean, they had no concept of why I would want to do it on a lot that's not mine and it belongs to the city. The concept was completely foreign and I'd never heard of that before. So I called a few of those and you got the same idea. Being involved in Penn State in the Master Gardener program was helpful in the way that I had ran into Marisa from Grow Pittsburgh, and she mentioned that, well, you know, they have started a conversation with an insurance company on establishing an insurance program that covers this kind of adopt-a-lot lease and this kind of access to the land. And so I've contacted Leslie at Next Year Insurance, and that took about 8 months, even for her to negotiate that deal. And she called me occasionally and said, are you still interested? I said, I am. And I would occasionally email Shelley saying, I'm still working on it. I mean, at that point, I thought I would be just written off, because who takes 8 months to get insurance? but it worked out. And she said, would you take it for $200? I was like, well, I guess it's better than $860. So eventually we agreed on $150 a year. The rest of the process was super easy because it was acceptable to the city as well. So we signed the contract. I mailed the money. I signed the insurance contract, and the adopt-a-lease was completed. Now this one, I was actually very excited to find out later from Grow Pittsburgh that I was the first one who signed up through this insurance program. I'm sure there are other ones, so I think that would have been helpful for me to know if there were other insurance programs available, something along the way. But I'm glad that this got worked out, and if anybody's interested, I have all the contact information up there for the insurance. It's Leslie Sherwin. I've emailed her. She'll be happy to hear from you. She mentioned that the more people sign up, the cheaper the cost will be. So the $150 is the max I may have paid for this year, next year, and for you, it might be cheaper. I call this page support instead of resources, and the reason is that the more I work in the garden, the better relationship I build with the neighbors. And it was really mind-opening. Occasionally, I needed electricity to assemble something or cut something, and there's a hot home next to the garden, and Clee, the neighbor, has 2 Dobermans maybe. There's some vicious-looking dogs that are, I'm sorry? Okay, sorry, I have 2 cats, so I don't know, but thank you. So, I thought, well, that's actually nice to have, so I approached him, and we created a relationship, and occasionally he lets me use his electricity if I need to work on something. Other neighbors who have walked by asked me if I would be willing to grow some collard greens that they could have, and I didn't grow collard greens before, but even though this will be focusing on native plants, there will be a section that I'd like to incorporate vegetable plantings as well, given that the levels were fine. So it was just really interesting to get to know the neighbors. And then across the street, the lady is renovating her house that she grew up on Flowers Avenue, and she grew up in that house. So she's renovating it, wants to rent it out eventually. So I just covered the insurance and the soil test as well. And that's the end of my presentation. There is my email, my name, and that picture is actually some of the garlic that I've been digging up. There's a whole 8-foot by 14 feet garlic field there that if you need garlic, we can go by and pull somewhere out. But I've been putting these out, and eventually they disappear. I don't know what happens to it, but hopefully something good.